Have you ever watched an anime so good that you wished it had a live-action adaptation? Me neither, but they still get made. We've been through this cycle for over 2 decades. Studios pour hundreds of millions of dollars into live-action anime adaptations, and almost every single one crashes and burns. Most of the fans don't even bother with them, and everyone just goes back to watching the original, since that is what you fell in love with. But in 2023, Netflix dropped One Piece, and something strange happened. People actually liked it, like genuinely liked it. So today we're going to figure out why live-action anime fails so consistently, and what One Piece did that nobody could have. Anime, specifically, has spent over 60 years developing a visual dialect that is entirely its own. Animation is not a lesser form of filmmaking, in some cases even surpassing it. It is a completely different medium with its own movement, physics, and its own emotional vocabulary. Think about the way Demon Slayer's water-breathing sequences move, those flowing, impossible trails of water and color that feel like they're painted in real time. Think about the exaggerated reaction faces in My Hero Academia. Think about the still frames in Evangelion that somehow carry more emotional weight than 1,000 words of dialogue. These are not compromises because animation is cheap. These are intentional artistic choices that communicate things a camera pointed at a human face simply cannot. The exaggerated movements and expressions bring another layer of life to animation, and they are fun to see. Even the special designs that characters get with their own over-the-top outfits, builds and colors cannot be replicated into a live-action medium. Animation simply operates outside the rules of physics. A character can be launched into a mountain and leave a crater shaped like their body, and it reads as dramatic and funny. On the other hand, the same thing rendered in live action reads as absurd. Well, this is the core contradiction that live action adaptations are born into. You are taking a story designed to exploit the infinite possibilities of animation and then just choosing to confine it inside the box of physical reality. And then there's another layer, anime's visual shorthand, the sweat drop, the chibi reaction, the frozen dramatic pose with a screaming internal monologue. Best example here would be Death Note. These are conventions the medium developed to communicate emotion quickly and broadly. They are deeply engraved and refined into anime, and they are deeply incompatible with live action unless you lean into them so hard you've basically made a parody. But here's the thing, when studios don't understand this, they make the first mistake. They try to recreate the look of anime in live action. The uncanny bleached hair, spiky silhouettes, oversized props, and instead of feeling faithful, it feels like an expensive cosplay photo shoot. Let me give you some examples. Dragonball Evolution. This is the granddaddy of bad anime adaptations. A movie so awful that Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball, was reportedly motivated to start writing Dragon Ball again just to wash the taste of it out of everyone's mouth. He really hated the live action and, to be honest, valid. They took a story about a Saiyan warrior trained since birth by his grandfather and turned into a high school movie, Goku, in high school, worried about prom. You see how that sounds? The next one is Death Note. Death Note is a psychological chess match between two of the most coldly brilliant characters in anime history. Light Yagami is a sociopath with a god complex who we are simultaneously rooting for and horrified by. The Netflix adaptation turned him into a screaming, impulsive teenager who can barely keep a secret for 20 minutes. The entire point of Death Note is that Light is terrifyingly competent. Strip that away and you have nothing. There's barely any essence to the character. And my god, this was so bad. You have to watch it just for the laughs. You cannot tell me they wanted to bring Death Note to life with this adaptation. The next one that appeared in the same year as Death Note is Ghost in the Shell, a landmark anime film about identity, consciousness, and what it means to be human, buried under whitewashing controversy and a plot stripped of all its philosophical tones. What should have been a thinking person's sci-fi film became a generic action movie with pretty visuals and nothing behind the eyes. Somewhat fitting for a story about an artificial brain, but not in the way they intended. But hear me out, it was still pretty good, better than the others, but something was still lost. Then we have Cowboy Bebop, and this one hurt differently. Netflix seemed to genuinely care. They had a decent budget, they hired well, they brought back Yoko Kanno to do the music, and it was still wrong, not bad per se, but the tone was off. The existential melancholy that makes Bebop what it is, that jazz-soaked loneliness, that feeling of people drifting through space with no real reason to keep going, became a quirky action show. Spike Spiegel stopped being a man haunted by his past and became a guy who makes jokes and punches people. people. It was cancelled after one season, to no one's surprise. The pattern is clear. They are the same mistake repeated over and over. The studios understand the plot, but they don't understand the soul of the story and what makes it great. Oh, and by the way, never mention Attack on Titan live action movie. That never happened, just don't. Ghost and Cowboy Bebop are at least accepted by a number of people. This was another level of painful to watch. A question I have seen a lot of times is why Marvel can do it and anime can't. Marvel has been successfully adapting comics into blockbuster films for 15 years. Comics and anime are both illustrated, serialized, and panel-based storytelling, so why can Marvel do it and live-action anime can't? The answer is in how the two mediums encode information. A Marvel comic is drawn to suggest movement. A panel of Iron Man flying is a static image that implies motion. It's always been a blueprint for what a real-world recreation might look like. When Stan Lee and Jack Kirby drew the Avengers in the 60s, they were drawing with a clear image in their minds. If you had the budget, you could actually build those suits, film those fights, and it would look right. Comics exist in a naturalistic visual space, exaggerated, yes, but fundamentally grounded in the physics of how a person's body moves. Anime is different. Anime motion exists specifically because it cannot be filmed. The visual language of anime was developed by studios, many of whom had very limited animation budgets to convey maximum emotional and kinetic impact through stylization. Fewer frames, more expressions. The famous Akira motorcycle slide works because it's a painting in motion, not because it's simulating physics, but because it's evoking speed. When Marvel adapts Spider-Man, they ask, how do we make a man swinging on webs look cool in real life? When someone tries to adapt Naruto, they ask, how do we make a boy run with his arms behind his back, shout the name of his attack before throwing it, and fight someone who has 8 tails while a live audience takes it seriously? These are not the same problem. There's also the question of story structure. Marvel films are mostly standalone or connected by light threads. You can watch Ant-Man without watching everything else. Anime, especially the long-running shonen series that Hollywood loves to adapt, is built on hundreds of hours of earned emotional investment. Luffy punching a celestial dragon hits different after 500 episodes. Compressing that into 2 hours doesn't just lose content, it loses stakes. Now let's address the elephant in the room, the visual effects. Anime action is animated, full stop. You can do anything, trust me. Budget constraints exist, yes, but they manifest as fewer frames, not as a physical impossibility. You cannot actually build a giant sand demon made of 1,000,000 grains. You cannot actually film a man summoning lightning from the sky with a specific hand gesture. And you cannot make Attack on Titan's ODM movements or Titans look good. So live action has to use CGI, and the CGI in these adaptations is almost always bad.
What the hell?
Part of the problem is financial. A streaming service might spend $100 million making a live-action anime show, and a huge chunk of that goes to costumes, sets, and mostly the actors. The VFX budget that remains is fighting against audience expectations set by MCU films with triple the resources. In animation, a character powers up and the world changes around them. Colors shift, lines vibrate, and the background literally changes to reflect their emotional state. That is not CGI lag, that is a stylistic choice baked into the medium. When you try to replicate it in live action, you get a person standing in front of a green screen while particle effects swirl around them. It looks fake and it looks cheap, not because the technology isn't capable, but because the visual language doesn't belong in live action. The best live action adaptations understand this and make a choice. Either commit to practical effects and stylized choreography, or lean so hard into the CGI that you're basically making an animated film with live action faces slapped on. One Piece notably leaned into the practical. They built real ships, real sets, real costumes, and they saved the CGI for the devil fruit powers, which they kept brief, impressionistic, and functional rather than trying to make them look like the anime. But we'll talk about that more soon. And here's one I've seen few people talk about. Anime is not just Japanese animation, it's a medium that encodes deeply Japanese cultural sensibilities about society, virtues, honor, sacrifice, group identity, the weight of duty, and these themes don't just live in the dialogue, they live in the pacing, in the silence of the characters, in the way a character will stand in the rain for a moment too long before speaking. When Hollywood adapts anime, it almost always westernizes the emotional logic. Characters become more verbally expressive, conflict becomes more externalized, the interiority, the long stares, the wordless communication, the things not said, gets replaced with exposition, because Western audiences, Hollywood assumes, need to be told how the characters are feeling. This strips out the atmosphere that makes the source material work, and atmosphere in anime is not decoration, it is the product. And I think the worst of it is the humor problem. Anime comedy is frequently broad, physical and culturally specific. When adapted, studios either cut it entirely, making the show feel weirdly serious, or try to translate it, which simply doesn't bring the same level of humor. For example, One Piece navigates this by embracing its absurdity. Luffy is allowed to be a ridiculously goofy guy who also happens to be an unstoppable force of nature. The show doesn't apologize for either. Okay, so let's talk about the outlier. Netflix's One Piece succeeded where everything else failed, and I want to be specific about why. First, they respected the source material's tone. One Piece, the anime, is operatic, colorful, emotionally sincere, and frequently absurd. The live action doesn't sand those edges off to make it more palatable to a general audience. Luffy is still Luffy, Zoro is still Zoro, they are both the same. The show trusts that you came here for One Piece, not a live action version of what some executive thinks One Piece should be. Second, the creator Eiichiro Oda was involved. He had creative approval. He reportedly halted production at least once to demand changes. When the creator of the source material has actual power over the adaptation, not just a courtesy edit, it shows. The show feels like it comes from the same creative soul. And third, they solved the villain problem. One of the quiet disasters of live action anime is that the villains never land. They're too theatrical, too over the top for live action to contain. One Piece's villains, specifically Arlong and Buggy, are played with exactly the right amount of camp. They're menacing and ridiculous simultaneously, which is exactly how they are in the source material. And fourth, they made the smart choices about what to skip. One Piece as a manga and anime is enormous, as we all know. The live action covers the East Blue Saga, the most contained, character-focused arc, and it doesn't rush it. It earns the emotional payoffs. They didn't try to do Marineford in season 1. They understood that you build a world before you try to break it. It's not perfect, the pacing may have some issues, some of the quieter emotional moments from the anime hit harder than they do here, but it works. And in a genre defined by failure, working is a minor miracle. So where do we go from here? Anime live action adaptations will keep getting made. The IP is too valuable, the fan base is too large, and the potential too lucrative for studios to stop trying. And sometimes one of them will find a formula. That animation is a language, not a style, that you cannot film the soul of the anime, you can only honor it. One Piece proved it's possible, the bar has been set, now we wait to see who clears it next. If you want to see more videos about anime, adaptations, and how an author ruined his manga, subscribe and drop a comment with which anime you think would actually work as a live action. There are a few, and that might be a whole other video, so see you in the next one.